what were the major challenges in the insurance industry in which we could work with insurance or the expertise of insurance to solve the challenges that are sort of bigger picture in society. And for me, the physical climate risk, or the ways in which climate risk is here today,
Yeah.
living, breathing consequences of worsening severe weather disasters, all of that was very much a problem that insurance was at the tip of the spear. Insurance is the place in which the opportunities, the mitigation, the discovery, the building back better, like all of that language,
Yeah.
parametric, all these concepts were there to say, what is the role of this industry that has hundreds of years experience managing this and helping us confront this existential crisis? Hi, this is Sarah Russell, the CEO at Bellwether, a group at Google X and the Moonshot Factory, and this is the future of insurance.
All right. Normally I would be like, hi, welcome to the show. It's great to see. We've already been going at it. Now I got to figure out, like, how do we have all this great stuff we were just talking about and fit it back into the episode? So we're just going to continue ahead. But Sarah, it is really good to have you on here. And
Thank you for this. I mean, I
yeah.
am super impressed by your LinkedIn presence and so forth. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you. I mean it.
Well, and you, despite not being an insurance person, you've been kind of sucked into our space. And like, and you sat down with the team at Instech over in London, and
Yeah.
so you've been around. But for people who don't know what is Bellwether, and some may know what Google X is and the Moonshot Factory, some may not. But can you tell us a little bit about that and what you're trying to solve for at Bellwether?
Sure. So, big picture, Alphabet is the mothership. It comprises search, cloud, YouTube, and so forth. X is a kind of other bet that refers to in the street, which is a division of Alphabet that powers a lot of innovation, standalone innovation. Historically, it used to happen in the hardware space. Things like Waymo came out of X, but over the past several years, it's been machine learning, AI, software. And I arrived about 5 years ago as an entrepreneur in residence. And at that time, I had been in healthcare my whole life and was feeling initially interested in the biotech project. But then I actually, if you can believe it, went to a workshop on how we might revolutionize insurance, if you can believe it.
I can believe.
I
I
got
think everyone
very
listening can believe it. Normal humans, maybe not, but
right,
okay.
exactly. Everyone on the call is like, "Oh, I would have been there," right?
Yeah.
But I, or everyone on the podcast, but I showed up and was first of all interested in this like broader concept, which is sort of wonky, but the way in which risk transfer makes capitalism work, right?
Yeah.
Like you need a judiciary to regulate, you need a source of capital, but you absolutely need risk transfer for people
Yeah.
to actually make investment and
Nothing
innovate.
happens in the world without it, and people don't get
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Well, that's actually novel for someone like me who, even though I knew insurance and from a health perspective, the idea that, wow, this is how people make money, lose money, and actually, but though do new things.
Yeah.
The idea that we take on risk from an innovation perspective because insurance is there to say, oh, yeah, we'll backstop that totally new wind turbine. Oh,
Right.
we'll backstop this, right? That's an interesting idea for me. And I really got interested in that. And then I started thinking about, what were the major challenges in the insurance industry in which we could sort of help, like work with insurance or the expertise of insurance to solve the challenges that are sort of bigger picture in society. And for me, the physical climate risk, or the ways in which climate risk is here today, like climate change is here today, it's
Yeah.
living, breathing consequences of worsening severe weather disasters. All of that here today was very much a problem that insurance was at the tip of the spear, right?
Yeah.
Insurance is the place in which the opportunities, the mitigation, the discovery, the building back better. Back then, we kept saying build back better. Like all of that language,
Yeah.
parametric, all these concepts were there to say, what is the role of this industry that has hundreds of years' experience managing this and helping us confront this existential crisis? And um, that was very interesting to me because it winds up leading to a bunch of conversations with insurance and reinsurance. And when I asked everybody, what's your hardest, biggest challenge in this space? At the time, they all said wildfire, which is why we got into wildfire first,
Yeah.
because our job is to go after hard problems that where we might otherwise have an advantage because of patient capital, more compute, more storage, more data. All of the goodness of Alphabet is available to us. And so that's where I started, was kind of backing out from this big space and then saying, well, where, if we solved this challenge, would it be meaningful for the industry, where we'd see an outsized impact? Now, of course, if you talk to insurance, they'd say severe convective storm. It's always
Yeah.
new. it's it's something new, but it's still the case, as unfortunately, LA taught us that wildfire is still important. So that's our origin story, so to speak.
And what is it that you're trying to do then?
Well, now, 5 years later, we have three products in the market, and we're focused on the ways in which we can help communities and businesses respond to, prepare for, and understand natural disasters far more effectively. And we do that through absolute risk scores
Hmm.
and real time data analytics. That's the mission of the company. Our big picture, of course, is to be able to predict all interactions of the natural world and the built environment. That's sort of the
Yeah.
moonshot story. But in the here and now today, we're squarely focused on the ways in which absolute risk scores and better data will power better action. So the three products are Bellwether Predict, which is a tool that forecasts the probability of severe weather, and the second one is Bellwether Rapid Response, which uses aerial imagery to very quickly understand the scene, a natural disaster scene, and all the critical infrastructure and key resources that have been damaged.
Mm.
And then the third is Bellwether Insure, which is a product aimed at helping insurance companies understand risk accumulation with respect to wildfire and how to actually improve sort of your opportunity to build a really robust, healthy portfolio with good risk. There's lots of good available risk in the market, but how can you do that? So those are the three products. But the thing that I think is interesting and exciting is this notion of absolute risk scores. This is the first step, I would imagine, in helping us start to reframe and revolutionize the way insurance is looking at this. Like when it comes to natural disasters, we have to move away from relative, severe, medium, low, whatever. We just have to
Yeah.
move away from color blocks. Underwriters have to stop saying like this is severe. Well, great, Tahoe's severe and San Francisco is low. Like that's
Yeah.
not useful if you're trying to make an underwriting decision. It's far more useful to say, well, the risk of a fire on the landscape is 2% in this part of Truckee, right? It's 2% in the year ahead. In San Francisco, it's 0.01. You know what I mean? That is a useful distinction, but
Yeah.
also one in which you can start assembling a portfolio because absolute risk scores are there. That's the kind of like basic, I think blocking and tackling we need to start moving toward, which is like, what is the absolute probability here? And then how do we work with that number?
One of the biggest barriers to profitability in insurance is price accuracy because you have no clue about the cost of the product when you're selling it. So the more accurate your price ends up being, the better. If we're just sort of like red, yellow, green, and like, well, we're in like a one-third tranche of relative like okayness on the price. I'm trying to sound not very impressive intentionally. But if you could go from like, we're sort of like within a third of where we should be, because there's only three spots to go, versus we've got that much level of specificity on at least the fire component of this and
Yes.
analogs for other spaces, that's unbelievably transformative. And for any actuary listening, I know they get that. Like the notion that like I've got a one, two, or three variable, which is almost a dummy variable, versus like I can actually assign a specific point value to this and do math off of that. That's like a massive unlock.
I agree. Well, I mean, thank you for saying that. And that's quotable. We're going to like do a little excerpt for
Okay.
that. Thank you very much. But here's the thing when you have this conversation with folks, invariably they complain about regulators, right? And they say, well, regulators won't let me use it. They won't
Yeah.
let me use it. So this is my new line. I just was on a podcast with Alice Kane, who's the insurance commissioner for New Mexico.
Okay.
She's like, yo, we're using the models. We said yes. Come to New Mexico. Like, there are places, I think we get very focused on California. Of course, it's like, what is it, the fifth largest economy in the
Yeah.
world? Reasonably so. Everyone wants to sell in California. But there are places like New Mexico, I think, that are trying to be out front saying, yes, come price with these better
Yeah.
models.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, a big issue too, is we may have better analytics, but I think many times insurers feel hamstrung by their ability to work with that information.
Yeah.
And and then and then also there's a very real anxiety about the black box. So if I tell you it's 1%, then they say, oh well, that's just could be astrology under the hood. And my
Or
answer is okay,
biased.
right, exactly. So
Yeah.
then I say, all right, we'll give you something that's the why. We call it a SHAP analysis, SHAP, but it's an analysis that says the model thinks the risk is 2% here because of the state of vegetation, the state of drought, and the slope of the hill. And the reason that the risk is being mitigated or lowered is because actually the vegetation type is particularly fire resistant or something like
Yeah.
that. So that ability to say this is what's driving up the risk and this is what's driving down the risk is very powerful for an underwriter or an
Yeah.
actuary trying to
Yeah.
understand what's going on here. And then this last piece is like, what's the action, right? Well, should I do this? Should I not do this? And that's why I think it's interesting to start constructing a portfolio and imagining, well, how could this all come together if I know I have this and this here and I need to stay in business? But this, by the way, has taken us quite a bit of time to figure out. Like I'm making it seem
Yeah.
like, boom, we built this whole thing overnight. But you only, it's like that great thing, a business model never survives its first contact with the market. Like the
Yeah.
first thing we brought in terms of wildfire, the anxiety about the black box was real.
Yeah.
And then the regulator issue is real. And then you just have to keep, pushing, pushing.
So as an entrepreneur, and I would imagine given the organization you work in, you're probably not completely, but largely devoid of the framing that we tend to put on things, coming from a world that's very risk averse. Like, yes, we go around buying risk, but we try to close it down and define it as much as possible. In insurance, I always say like we frame things around the terms of we can't because regulators, because whatever, which and they're all valid pushbacks, right? But I always say, like, yeah, let's just assume that's parked for a second. How might we? Because you've just said no before you've even so if the answer is like, well, we can do this in New Mexico, like, well, it's not a big enough market. We can't because the market's not big enough. We need to be in California. Okay, well, you can't be in California today. So how might we start in New Mexico, Connecticut, like whatever state, learn? And one thing actuaries, regulators love is you have to prove it to us. What if
Right.
you amass some data to start to prove it out that like, no, here is why it isn't biased. Here is what the impact is. Here's what happens to loss ratios. But you never get any of that if your answer is just, oh, we can't because, so we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, which is, by the way, not profitable or sustainable. So like if what you're doing right now is leading to the end, why would you defend it so hard? So I have so
Right.
much trouble with that.
I mean, this is interesting. By the way, before we get on California, I just got off a meeting with the Department of Insurance there, and they were 100% focused on this new transformation that Laura put in, which is we're
Yeah.
now all in on these models. Their time is totally devoted to this new kind of model, which is
Yeah.
another thing, which is, well, how might we respond now that we have a partner on the other side of the table that's playing ball? They took a
Yeah.
ton of political risk, right? The real estate agents, everyone's up against them, and they're like, all right, we're in. We gave you this, right? Like we're going. So
Yeah.
this is the other thing too, is we got to be aware when people are actually giving a bit. Like, we're trying, man, we're trying.
Yeah.
So I agree. How
But you
might
don't
we?
see that if we can't because it, because you're like, oh no, they'll never come around. Okay, well, not with that attitude. But maybe if there's like
Right.
we have to engage.
Yes, yes. And the other thing I think is, I mean, the extent is just as an entrepreneur, the two of us are always trying to figure out how can we learn faster, right?
Yeah.
Because our job is to just be learning machines. Like we have to learn as fast as we can. And I think like the our challenge is to figure out in an industry in which they're distracted by a lot of things. Everyone's got a lot of, like, very few people are bored in their jobs, right? They're doing a lot all day long. How do you learn as much as you can when you might be in a slow sales cycle and so forth? So how do you keep
Yeah.
making progress and validating that what you have is real in the market? And I you know I I'm sort of interested in like your take on this, right? Like if you were to bring in a typical Instech person, one thing I've been thinking about lately is like, is a vertical solution the answer to a longer sales cycle, which is a more comprehensive picture of here's a risk forecast, here's an understanding of how you might respond to fire, like, and detect it. Here's an AI solution for fire detection. Here's a suppression strategy. Oh,
Yeah.
and by the way, I'm going to help you manage the land by doing all the controlled burns for you.
Yeah.
Do you know, maybe that's what we're starting to move toward too, is that this is so much effort that maybe the solutions we're bringing to the insurance industry need to be far more comprehensive. I don't know what you think of that. Does that just feel like
I
a fool's errand?
no, so I think whether it's a like hyper focused piecemeal solution or like the end all be all solution to the hail problem or the wildfire problem or whatever, if such a thing exists. Um, I don't think there's an answer of what the right path is because there are going to be buyers who are like, well, that doesn't do anything for us. We still got all this other stuff and we can't figure that out. And then there's
Yeah,
also going to be buyers in the whole solution that's like, that's not my department. I can't pay for that. I'd have to get underwriting on board and I'd have to get,
yeah,
so there's a buyer for all those things. They're hard to find no matter what. But I mean, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. It's like part of our issue as an industry is like we are very siloed functionally. We're absolutely siloed across companies. And yet, it's a super tight, like incestuous industry. We all move around, like everyone knows each other. So why don't why aren't we able to break through that more? And I think there's a lesson in this conversation where like what we have a responsibility as an industry to tackle this problem. So what behaviorally might we need to change to be able to engage with the solutions that are there? So like, do you think it's the one end-to-end solution, or it needs to be more hyper focused and kind of point specific? And then what do we as an industry do to take advantage of that?
Yeah. Well, going back to, I liked your point when we talked, you just said about New Mexico, which is the idea of collecting proof points.
Yeah,
So maybe before you build the whole hog, right? Which is a lack of focus, which if you listen to any entrepreneurial podcast, they all say focus, 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 right? So
MVP it.
MVP it, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, I shouldn't deny the learnings of those who've gone before us. But I'd love also your idea of collecting proof points. So it could be that what we do is we find internal champions, which has been my experience, by the way. Once you get a
yeah,
good champion on the inside, it's like gold, right? So I think the first thing we have to do is make it easier for them to sell internally. So package up a very nice, tight story in which the ROI and the value is super clear to everybody so they can go bring that to everyone internally, right? So that's
yeah,
our first job. The second job is once we get that sold, is to turn that into a very compelling proof point.
yeah,
Is probably has to do with business value, has to do with new opportunities. I think the other place too for this is probably ENS, which is a place where the regulator story is not on the table, but it's a story really of how do we expand our business here? What's the opportunity? So that could be the other practical place where if you win in ENS, maybe then everything expands
yeah,
back to, a more regulated market. So I'm sort of interested. Our the job though to learn and to understand as much as we can as quickly as possible and then to keep pursuing product market fit. Like that exercise is super fun and humbling, but I think we can't do it unless we have a customer or a market on the other side that's saying yes. And I still think
yeah,
that's the case for all of NatCat. I still think we
yeah,
still have a market that's like, please help.
yeah, yeah. And I think there are enough carriers that have big enough footprints that if you were to get one or two of those larger players, even mid-size, you would start to have enough of a dent. A, that you create FOMO, and it's one thing we're really good at as an industry is we may not be fast movers, but once we see we miss something, it's like, oh no, we have to do it too. So, I think it does. I mean, I learned that selling in insurtech myself is like once you get a few, then you stop having to tell your story and they start coming to you. Um,
Mm,
but you also like, what if you picked up, it's, I was talking about hail damage and trying to do preventative, when you're replacing a roof, like put on a more resilient roof. So you're just trying to finance the delta and not the total roof replacement of a resilient roof. Well, if we're buying, a homeowner's going to buy one roof every 20 years or something, hopefully more, they're not going to get any kind of volume pricing. If carrier X, who has, tens of thousands of roofs, is working out something with the manufacturers and a panel of installers and, all this other stuff, they're going to get volume scale pricing that no individual could get. So maybe that delta's smaller. If you're talking about partnering with a carrier, your ability to impact the outcomes goes up dramatically versus having to make those one-off sales, of a resilient solution or to convince, any one player to do something. So I think if we want to see that change, we sort of have to get on board to allow the scale to catalyze it.
yep. Well, it also makes, I mean, you're describing something that also feels like a local market play, which is sort of interesting too. Is I don't know to what extent the bigger players in insurance have local opportunities to change the market because I mean, you could imagine a bunch of
Some
local
do.
players, installers, the
Yeah.
roofers, the subs, everyone could come
They all have
together. And
networks.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and local. No,
Anyway, we got
this
body
is,
shops, contractors, all of it.
yes, yes. And I mean, it is like this. I mean, this is a labyrinth that's thoroughly known. I don't think what you're describing, people haven't done it before. I think what
Yeah.
we probably do need though is maybe some good cycle in which people are feeling like this risk is worth taking, and maybe if you can spread that risk. It's interesting. I like this kind of stuff. It's high risk, the five-handed play, get everyone together. But it's
Yeah.
the kind of thing too where once you collect that data, right, then maybe it's the same thing. Two or three cities later, they're like, all right, we're in, we're in, we're
Yeah.
in. And then,
The city point is an interesting one because there are, if you think about an area, like they're all dealing with the same problem and they're all not getting insurance or can't afford it or whatever. And they're all getting hit with the hail or the coastal erosion or the fire, or whatever it might be. So you're starting to see communities come together and apply for some sort of bond to try to either buy coverage with it, self-insure, or to make that area more resilient to that shared risk that they all face. That might also be another path. The problem is like relative to the country, it's a small footprint, but that's again, that's a we can't because like, well, you could still
Well, but
get
you
with
know what?
them and start the data and
If it's $400 million in property value, you could
it's like
probably get
nothing.
like FM Global or one of these, like you could get an interesting insurance linked something. Like I like your
Yeah.
idea of bond, right? Like maybe it's a new instrument that says
Yeah.
we'll backstop this entire resilience play because on the other side we're going to get the insurance and we'll, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's the other piece is the the idea of the new instrument.
Yeah.
Which because it's a lot of value. I mean, even
Yeah.
if it's a small town, right? I mean, it's just a lot of value.
Yeah.
Someone's got to be on the other side wanting to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a $50 billion carrier, you may not care about that, but you start to add that stuff up. Yeah, it's like when people used to run out of minutes on their cell phone plans in like the 80s and 90s when you had 30 minutes a month for like $300. And it's like I never used my phone, but you always called when you were around the corner to say I'll be right there. And everything got rounded up. So people were always going over their minutes and feeling like they never used it. So if you keep saying no to like 400 million in total insured value because it's too small, well, a bunch of those do add up to something material. And it's a market you couldn't be in otherwise. So it's sort of it's either you've pulled out of it and lost out, or it's net new because you had no solution to be a player in that to begin with.
Right. I mean, this is what you've also described as like the innovator's dilemma, Clay Christensen, rest in peace. But this, I mean, I live it all the time at Google or at Alphabet. It's very hard. I mean, I think we're fighting the good fight right now with Gemini and doing great work, but it's still really hard for huge established companies to
Yeah.
innovate because if you have a cash cow or something generating revenue that works, to say to someone, "Oh, here's a $300 million business," they're going to
Yeah.
scoff at it.
Right.
They're like, "Oh no, that's just not exciting." Do you know
Yeah.
we have 9 products with 1 billion users? Something like this, right? I mean, if you're
Yeah.
talking to people who are operating businesses with 1 billion users,
Right.
and you say to them, "Hey, I have this great opportunity that's like a 400 million," you know,
Yeah.
you can't get a rise
It
out of them,
doesn't do
right?
anything for the shareholders. They're not going to care about it.
Right. So this is,
Yeah.
I mean, these are innovation challenges that are well known, right? So it's like it's humbling, but it's also like, well, maybe now at some point when it becomes the case as you're describing, as you said in the beginning, if no one's getting insured, it
Yeah.
kind of becomes desperate,
Yeah.
right? Like you sort of at a place where someone's going to go for it.
Yeah. There is, so I know we're, well, I have time. I don't know if you do, because I'm sure
Let me
you're
check.
super
Yeah, I
busy.
think I can. Let me just make sure I have to.
I'll ramble about this while you look. Um,
No, I do have time. Let's do it. Yeah.
okay. Waymo, Apple had a self-driving endeavor. GM just shut down Cruise. Three examples of, mega billions of dollars companies with huge valuations. GM's teeny by comparison, which is like when you're saying GM's a small company, you've got a problem. Um, Waymo's the only one who survived. The others have both been shut down despite pouring billions into them. What's different in Google's approach to solving these problems? That is it just like, well, we have more cash. That doesn't fit because Apple's got more cash. So like it's not as simple as we didn't have the money to do it. It's not as simple as like, well, it was big enough for us because you guys, Apple and Google are similar size. GM's way smaller. So if the prize is the same size, it would be even more valuable, relatively speaking, to GM. Why was Google able to continue on with Waymo? And is there a lesson for us when we're like, oh, that's not big enough for us? That market's too small. In New Mexico is not a big enough market for us. We're not, like, is there anything we can take from what Google's done with the moonshot approach that might allow us to try some of these things that we swear off because they're not going to move the needle in and of themselves?
Hmm.
And if you don't have the answer, I'll just edit it out so no one will be the wiser. But I'm really
Well,
curious about this.
no, I mean, I think the origin story for Waymo is very important. I think Sergey Brin, a founder of Google, was around X all the time before Sundar took over, and I think
Yeah.
having a founder very close to a project and an effort is both inspiring and provides tailwinds and reminds people that they're here to do big things.
Yeah.
So my instinct is that having founder support and having a founder who wants to go after big things like this and place a bet on the future is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we should ever underestimate that that's inspiring and also provides tailwinds. I think the other thing is some of the stuff that Waymo required in terms of compute and storage and data processing and ML of like LiDAR and all that, a lot of that insight is the kind of stuff that Alphabet was able to probably leverage other skills and other parts of its business to power.
Sure.
You know, we have a ton of storage, we have a ton of compute, we have all these resources. We're essentially data, you know, we're a data storage company. So
Yeah.
I bet a lot of our assets that we had internally made Waymo make more sense. I mean, we did pivot. We thought we were building cars. Now we're building the software to power those
Yeah.
cars. But I'm sure over time we figured out the ways in which our internal business benefited this particular Waymo business.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, just the same way we stuck with Waymo, there's lots of things we've totally cut and stopped supporting. But the Waymo, I think its origin story within X is has helped it quite a bit, you know. But you can edit that out if that's not the compelling because it
No,
has
it's
to go
it's
with
just interesting for people to think about.
yeah, like what is, you know, if people talk about pet projects, but it didn't feel like that. It sort of felt like this founder was here. I mean, to be honest, I remember he was like eating a yogurt in the kitchen or something, and I walked in and I did like a 180. I was like, "Oh my god," you know. But it's like, but he's just around, like it's super
Yeah.
chill. But I think it made everybody who you know feel like, "Oh no, we're here to do big things. We're gonna stick to
Yeah.
South."
I think I talk a lot about hubris being really dangerous, and I think that that is something in the C-suite that we have to be careful about. So most insurance companies, their founders have died decades and decades ago. Um, as my first book, the youngest company was 98 years old, was USAA, who's now over 100. So like when that's, like GM being small, when USAA is the youngster, that's a problem. But it doesn't mean you have to have the founder, but it does mean that you have to have leadership that is not overcome by hubris and is willing to be curious and try it out and be supportive. And you can be foolhardy about that as well, but there is a balance and you can't just swear one off because of the other. Like you can pour excessive cash into self-driving cars and go nowhere with it. There are examples of that. You can do that and still have a place to go with it. And you need leadership who can sort of walk that line and understand it's still hubris, right? Like, no, we can do this no matter what. Like, well, now you're starting to just get like egotistical and overconfident. That's not the same thing as being supportive and creative.
Right, right. I mean, it seems to me that if you want to convince Wall Street that you know your share price should be the price it's at or even higher, you have to be the kind of leader who can both run a business incredibly efficiently such that there is bandwidth, time, and talent
Yeah.
to go after the big picture with you know the leadership and humility you're describing. But
Yeah.
it seems like that's this impossible task we ask of these folks, which is run your business so efficiently that Wall Street's happy, but then also please have enough left over to break the mold. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty rough, right?
So here's the benefit insurance has is we have some of the largest players are not public. They're mutuals. So they can be
Oh, great
safe from,
point.
think about Northwestern Mutual on the life side. You've got State Farm, you got Nationwide, like
No, good point,
you've
good
got
point, good
Liberty
point.
Mutual. You get some really big mutuals. So that could be a benefit to save you from some of that scrutiny. But the other side of it that could be interesting is I I love efficiency, but I hate it because we overfocus on it. And you can't, if you look at carriers who are losing money, it's not the size of their expense ratio, it's worse than that. So we can't just efficiency our way to a problem. If you're a manufacturer, you're purely operations, you're selling an intangible good like data or data storage, the more efficiently you operate, the more money drops to the bottom line. With insurance, yes, it's intangible, but there's only so far you can go with that. The core product itself has to be profitable. Like the loss ratio has to work back to the pricing point. So we have this, I think, opportunity. Yeah, run the company efficiently, but unlike a lot of other companies that could just be more efficient in their operation to be profitable, we have this gift and curse, this other lever that we can pull that if we get the actual underwriting right, and the scale with which we get it right can drive significantly better returns. So it's not just about like cutting heads and using AI to, replace people and get
Yeah,
processes done
yeah.
faster.
No, so well said. I mean, so well said. That's a great, it's something it's so important to think about and remember. Um, yeah, well, then, you know, how might, right? If you come down to that idea of pricing risk, that's our job. That's what we do. That's what we aim to do. How do we do that as well as we can? I mean, this does get at this idea of this fundamental thing that I hear quite a bit when I'm in the business of selling is, listen, like I have many views of this risk. You're like a fourth view, and you're
Yeah.
trying to get me to buy the fourth view, right? And I
Yeah.
say that's reasonable. So one interesting thing I would say is, if you have all these views of risk, or if you have 9 people giving you an opinion on the state of this roof, is there a role for a low cost, high efficiency way to better evaluate all the data that's coming in? I mean, it could be an opportunity where underwriting takes advantage of technology to make
Yeah.
use of all the resources it's built up over time.
But it's not just to evaluate those data points more efficiently. It's to get to the better data points. So like, yes, we're going to waste less time doing it, but for the point of picking the better prediction, which then has this other multiplying effect on the profit. That's my point. Is like,
No, totally. But my
yeah,
point is that I think actually these large models and AI in general will be the one who tells you with some efficiency the weighted probability of the true state of the roof.
yes, yeah,
That's
yeah.
the
It's
point.
both.
Because I think the model is going to be able to go out and look at all the different sources and look at the
Yeah.
most recent picture from a 3D perspective and say, based on all this, I'm going to give the following probability to the state of the roof being this.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what I think is going to happen, and it's going to happen faster and more
Yeah.
efficiently and cheaper than we imagine, such that it's, to me, it's going to be a leapfrog kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like truly, I think our obsession with data, fair enough, like, but the ways in which we really worry about data quality, I think there might be a leapfrog moment with the natural world, the built environment, and the ways in which all of these pictures we have will come together and be sorted such that, like, oh no, this is a really good understanding of what this looks like.
Yeah.
I think it's so much closer than we imagine.
It needs to be.
It's great.
So I guess that's the question I leave you with is looking forward. You've been messing around with this insurance space for a little while now because of the work that you're doing. Is there hope for us? What do you see going forward? And maybe when you said you think it's sooner than we think it is, do you have a sense of time scale around these things, or is that an irrelevant thing for you to focus on because it's just about getting to the best answer as quickly as you can without worrying about like, well, we said it'd be this time and it's not.
Yeah. So first things first, I love the point of longevity. I mean, I think the fact that these businesses have been around, 100 years is
Yeah.
the reason that you're embedded in society. You're key to society. You're key to the solution. Like everyone wants to be a part of that business. You're essential. Like you're essential to the function of society. So you have a right to come up with solutions. You have a right to weigh in. You have a right as an industry to say, let's do this. Let's try this. So I
Yeah.
think that seat at the table has been earned by this business of insurance. And so
That's good.
they should be at the table and lead. Like if you're not at the table, you're not going to lead.
Yeah.
Like you have to be at the table. So I say like claim that spot and say we're here to lead.
Yeah.
The second thing is I am really now a little bit crazy about this, but I think we are having a moment as big as the internet. And we're not going to see it until for a few years. But these new large models are that powerful and crazy. It's going to
Yeah.
be as big as the internet. And I think to the extent that we can get everybody in our companies in the next 2 years coding with these tools, using these tools, being powered by these tools, no one's going to be replaced by them, but the people who are working with them well will feel more empowered and on top of it and telling their leaders about it. To the extent, I think that's a 2-year thing, truly. I
Right.
think in 2 years, we're going to have teams who are understanding and grokking and working with this and figuring out governance and safety and trust. And, so you're at the table and you're leading at the table, at least start to form an opinion in
Yeah.
the next 2 years about where you're going to be and what you need to see.
Yeah.
That to me is a very, very important thing, that this is happening much faster than we imagine. Now, in 5 years or 10 years, I think some of these data problems will seem quaint.
Yeah.
Like I think a 3D view of the world that's relatively real and up to date is going to be much more possible. And some of these things will be quaint, but we'll be talking much more about fairness and equity and
Yeah.
hard decisions about like the value of your home, right? I mean, this is everyone's wealth in America. So this is a big deal. We're going to be wrestling with those issues, I think, instead.
2 years, I think, is an important number for people to keep in mind then as they go forward, because that doesn't give you the time to say like, oh, I should be curious about this, but it's not really this is for my successor or my successor's successor. That's an irrelevant statement. Like that, it's actually an incredibly relevant statement because it's going to make you irrelevant. That's not enough time. And I think if we look at the time scale so far, knowing that it will only get faster. 2 years doesn't sound that irrational. Like
Well,
ChatGPT didn't exist not that long ago. Gemini didn't exist not that long ago. Like less than 2 years, right? Gemini has not been a product for 2 years yet.
right. And what's the action to take? I mean, Bard was around a long time ago, right? But we weren't public with it. But
Yeah, it wasn't a public, right?
right. What I would say that in terms of the action, just to put it out there, to be kind of honest about what I'm doing with my own team, is I'm telling everybody to buy subscriptions to all the tools and I'll pay for them. Like it's coming out of my budget. And I'm saying, I
Yeah.
want all of you using all these tools, getting comfortable, trying different things, figuring out where they hallucinate, mess up, start. And you can use basic Python to create an API that links you to an important data set. And
Yeah.
like you can start doing this work far faster than you imagine. So I'd say to everybody, start doing this. I'll pay for it, and like lower the friction and say like by the end of the year, if you're coding on my team and you're data science, I want to understand how you're using AI.
Yeah.
Like how is it happening, right? And then it's not like just having an expectation, because I have to say in my own team, I've had people who've touched, gone in and worked and it hallucinated, gave me bad code. And I'm like, that's not right. That's not where we're at. We're like,
Yeah.
we have to go back, re-engage,
Yeah. People do bad code too. That's happened. Seen plenty of it. Yeah, we could honestly go for hours. This is a ton of fun. I feel like for listeners, this was either really energizing and informative or disjointed, but either way, hopefully really informative. But I certainly was energized by it. I can't thank you enough for making the time for this.
Brian, this was really fun. Anytime, and happy to be helpful. This was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.